Well, good morning, everybody. So glad you joined me for today's devotion. We are in 1 Kings chapter 6. We've actually skipped a couple of chapters in 1 Kings. Chapter 4 that identifies a lot of the government officials and so on in Solomon's administration. And then verse 5, his political alliance with another king and the conscription of laborers to build the temple. In chapter 6, we have described in detail the temple itself and the construction of it. You know, how big it was. If, as they think, a cubit is 18 inches, it was basically not the courtyards, but the proper temple itself, the building, 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, 45 feet tall, and then on the sides of it were other 3 stories of storage buildings. So when I say 30 feet wide, that's just inside the temple itself, the holy place and the Holy of Holies. And all those details are in there. And the cedar wood, which in their day was as good a wood as you could use, over the walls, and then gold overlays. It's all described in here. And it's massive and it's beautiful. But what got my attention was in the midst of all this description of the temple, and the temple stood for 400 years, give or take. Okay, 900 something BC is when Solomon builds it. 587 BC, 400 years later or so, it's destroyed by the Babylonians. So it stood for 400 years and then it vanished. It was burned to the ground. But it's massive and it's beautiful. But in the midst of all these details about the construction and the beauty and the glamour of the temple, God speaks to Solomon and says something, starting at verse 11. Now the word of the Lord came to Solomon, saying, concerning this house which you are building, the temple, if you will walk in my statutes and execute my ordinances and keep all my commandments by walking in them, then I will carry out my word with you, which I spoke to David your father. And I will dwell among the sons of Israel and will not forsake my people Israel. And then it picks up in verse 14. So Solomon built the house and finished it. And then it goes on to all these details. But in the midst of these details, on the front side and the back side, these details about the temple building are these spiritual words about if you obey me, if you walk with me, if you serve me, if you live for me, I'll be with you. And if you don't, I won't. And then it's back to building the temple. And so in my journal at the top of the page, what I titled my devotion for this day was Beautiful Churches and Cathedrals. Beautiful churches and cathedrals that are today empty and dead. Empty and dead. If you travel in England or Europe, you'll see all kinds of cathedrals that once were strong churches with hundreds or thousands of people worshiping. Big, beautiful structures. Today they're tourist sites. I've done that in England. I've toured them in Italy and other places. Beautiful cathedrals, beautiful churches, but dead and empty. Here in York County, South Carolina, America, buildings, not always big and massive and beautiful, but churches, church buildings. And once there was a vibrant congregation, and now either it's a very small congregation, 1 or 2 families just keeping the doors open, or it's an abandoned building, or it's been purchased by someone or some group and converted into a restaurant or to apartments or whatever, or just torn down and something else built on that site. Beautiful churches, vibrant churches, cathedrals, but today dead and empty or dying and almost empty. Now, what's the point? The point is this. If we don't walk with God and obey God, share the gospel, The building doesn't matter. The building does not matter. It'll just become an empty shell someday. The spiritual building, the body of Christ, the spiritual building matters a whole lot more than the physical building. Because if you are a body of Christ, you can move from one physical building to another physical building and keep bringing glory to Jesus. But if you're not walking with God, if you're not a body of Christ that's bringing honor to Jesus and on mission for Jesus, what building you're in or where it's at doesn't matter at all. Beautiful buildings, nice buildings, functional buildings, beautiful cathedrals, great, nothing wrong with it. But it's about Jesus. And that matters 1,000 times more than any building. And sometimes in churches we forget that. We need to be reminded that walking with the Lord, without that, buildings don't matter. Walking with the Lord, that always matters. How's your walk with Jesus? God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow.